students! I'm Emily Poole. This is Anti-Social Studies AP European History Edition. Let's do this. Today I want to talk about what you need to know when you walk into class on day one, and it's not as overwhelming as you thought. Hopefully by now, however, you've studied a map of Europe and that you understand where all those countries are located on a map, so that when I'm talking about, I don't know, Germany or the Holy Roman Empire, you in your brain are thinking, okay, that's in the center of Europe. Geography is important. Please make sure that you study those things. Now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about some contextualization. So the great thing about AP European history is that across the world, it's offered at different points, which means that some people will come into this class having a background knowledge of world history, and some people won't. So because of that, I wanted to even the playing field and talk about contextualizing Europe and what was going on in European history from 500 to really 1100. So on this map here, I have a map showing the fragmentation of Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire fell in what historians say is 476 CE, and then after that, Europe fragmented into kind of these feudal kingdoms. There was no one political governing body that united the rest of Europe together like Rome had for centuries in European history. So we have these kingdoms that come and go really for about 500 years in Europe. And because there's this political vacuum that exists after the fall of the Roman Empire, the Catholic Church really steps in and becomes the glue that keeps Europe united during this time period. They act like a political stabilizing force when not much else will. This is the start of the Catholic Church's dominance in European history, and that's going to be really important for you to know, especially for these first few units. The other thing that's going on in Europe is because they're living in these really small-scale, self-sufficient kind of manor systems, small kingdoms, there's a lot of limited trade. You don't need to trade with other people, and also people don't realize that there are other countries and empires in the world that you can trade with. So because of that, there's limited technological and innovative development due to this lack of trade. People are more focused on trying to literally survive than try to make things that will make their life better. Now you might be thinking, how about Miss Bull, Charlemagne, and his little renaissance that happened in the 800s? I don't care. I'm talking about the general idea of what's happening in European history. It's called the Dark Ages for a reason. Europe is behind the rest of the world at this point that are all experiencing these beautiful golden ages. So Europe has limited technological development, really limited innovations, really small scale trade during this time after the fall of the Roman Empire, and then they also kind of keep getting invaded by lots of people like the Magyars and the Vikings. Now, a major event happens in 1095. Pope Urban II calls for the First Crusade. These crusades are these holy wars between these European Christians and then the Muslims living in kind of the Eastern Mediterranean, Northern African, Middle Eastern area. These crusades are sometimes called history's most successful failures, in that Europeans set out to, reclaim the Holy Land and failed ultimately in doing so. But in the series of crusades that happened over the course of really 200 years, Europeans were able to open themselves back up to the rest of the world. Europeans were able to gain access to technology, innovation, Greek and Roman classics that had been preserved in madrasas for centuries. And all of that is going to be brought back to Europe, and there's going to be this revival of learning that occurs in Europe in, the early 1400s. So there's a huge revival of learning thanks to the Crusades. Europe was locked off from the rest of the world and now is exposed to the fact that, all of these other civilizations were indeed in their golden ages and are hooked up to these trade routes that have existed in Africa and in Asia for centuries, like the Silk Road, like the Trans-Saharan trade, like the Indian Ocean trade, and trade is brought back to Europe. Things are brought back to Europe. Europe is slowly emerging from its dark ages. Now, most of this trade comes through Europe, in Italy, which again, you should know where that is because you've studied a map of Europe. And the people that start to control these trades in these Italian city-states in northern Italy start to become very wealthy. Students, what do wealthy people do with all their money? They buy fancy things. They spend it on art. Or as I like to call it, I'm stealing this from Andrew Marr, these Italian city-states and these mayors and kind of leaders of these Italian city-states start to bedazzle their city to show off their wealth to the rest of Europe. this leads to the Renaissance. Now that we've contextualized that, I want to talk about two more things before we begin this YouTube series. Some general things to think about in AP European history. I'm going to be talking a lot about the balance of power. Things are not always balanced. Different people have more power at certain times than other people, and sometimes that shifts. You need to understand or maybe think about European history and who has the power and who doesn't have the power. Hey, for example, in the Middle Ages in European history, the church had a lot of power. But now that there's this revival of learning, now that there is this understanding of the rest of the world in a new way, how is that Renaissance going to impact the balance of power that exists in Europe? Is it going to weaken the church or strengthen the church? I don't know. We'll find out next time. The other thing that I wanted to talk about too is that art really does imitate life. Something that I love about teaching AP European history is that I get to talk about all of the art in European history, which is not a thing that I used to like, but now I really love it. So I think that it's super helpful for you to make sure that you're aware of the artistic movements that are happening as you're studying these histories, because it will give you a visual understanding and like a little thing to just like anchor your thoughts to of what's actually happening in Europe. When we're looking at Renaissance art, we're looking at this hearkening and heralding back to the classics. We care about Greece, we care about Rome, and like, wow, the School of Athens, look at all these smart people that came before us. Yeah, that imitates the fact that there's this revival of learning and there's like this desire to return back to the good times in Europe as a result of the Renaissance happening and as a result of all of these Greek and Roman texts getting brought back to Europe. So understanding the art and what it looks like and what it is representing really is quite indicative of what the culture in Europe is like at the time. Make sure you keep those two things in mind. Also, make sure you support Anti-Social Studies, like and subscribe, join our Patreon community, and follow us on our social media. Bye, y'all.